Hi, welcome. My name's Melissa. I am a producer for the Brown Arts Institute, and this is one of the very first events of the Brown Arts Ignite series, which is a year-long series of all sorts of wonderful imaginings and dreamings by people both in and around Brown and the community beyond Providence and beyond Providence. So this event was brought to the Brown Arts Institute and the Ignite series by Ruby and Alessandra. This is their a dream, their brainchild, and we are so happy to partner with you and with the Cape Verdean American Community Development Center in Pawtucket to bring you this series of 4 events. Next week we'll be at the Cape Verdean American Community Development Center in Pawtucket, and then back here at Brown the following Saturday, and then back at the CACD for the last event, in which I hear there will be some delicious food as well.
Yeah.
Okay. But I'm going to hand it over to Ruby and Sandy. Thank you.
All right. All right, welcome everyone to tonight's event, which is called Reparations and Representations, Resounding Cabo Verdean Musics in Fox Point. This event centers on the history of the Fox Point neighborhood in Providence, which is a historically Cabo Verdean neighborhood which was raised and gentrified by the city with the complicity of Brown University throughout the 20th century. So this event starts with a panel, which is just kind of a conversation, bringing our 2 guests into dialogue around sonic and political repair for the Fox Point community. And then following the event, one of our panelists and some of his guests will lead a workshop centered around community resilience, following the guiding metaphor of the Cabo Verdean Terreiro, which is a community gathering space for sonic and civic participation.
Thank you. And now I will do the honors of introducing our 2 wonderful guests for this evening. Our first guest is Tiny Tavares, who is here with us on the screen. Welcome, Tiny.
Hello there.
Mr. Tavares is the member of the R&B funk soul supergroup, The Tavares, who grew up in Fox Point and witnessed the Cape Verdean American community's vibrant musical and cultural life firsthand. He is currently recording music from his own father, Flash Tavares, and his aunt, Vicky Vieta, both of whom were key figures in the Fox Point music scene in the mid-20th century. Tiny will be joined by Dr. Silas Pinto, who is here sitting in the audience, a racial justice leader in Providence who has recently worked on reparations research and policy with the Providence Reparations Commission, which aims at closing the present-day racial wealth and equity gap. Through healthcare, policing, financial, and heritage policy, Dr. Pinto is also a noted mestre of the Brazilian capoeira tradition and directs community martial arts and movement practice through the New Wave Martial Arts. Welcome, Tiny and Silas. Right. So to start off the conversation, I would love for each of you to speak to your own histories in Providence, especially your relationship with the Cape Verdean American community and local space in and outside of Fox Point. Where is community for you, and how has that changed over the years?
So yeah, I think we'll start with Tiny.
Okay, well, my beginnings started on South Main Street in Fox Point. We lived in the community now where I spoke to was where they have the all the restaurants and waterfront activities. That used to be our sandlot. That's where we grew up, right across the street from the Boys Club. At the time, it was only known as the Boys Club. Through the years, we moved from Fox Point, again, being pushed out in many respects to the east side. I know a lot of our family members moved to East Providence, but most of us went to the east side or we went to South Providence. As far as what came about musically, my father and my aunt brought, their style of music to the community, then also passed it on to us, and we performed in the Boys Club. If you look back at some of our old photography, you'll see pictures of us when I was probably around 8 years old. And that's indicative of where we got our start.
Yeah, absolutely.
My name is Silas Otenel Rodrigues Pinto. I am the son of Belmira Vega Rodrigues and Alceu Pinto from the Cape Verdean Islands. And I immigrated here in 1989. We bounced around for a little bit in the United States. We were in Baltimore and then North Dartmouth, Massachusetts, and eventually landed in Providence in 1991. I lived on the South End, still do. I actually live about 2 minutes from where I grew up. And my relationship with Fox Point was actually through Mr. John Brito, who was basically my very first mentor, if you will. I think he was the mentor of probably 90% of Cape Verdeans around here. We would walk from South Providence to Fox Point, the Boys and Girls Club there, and that's the first time that I actually heard stories about Cape Verdeans in Rhode Island. And I was a little bit too young to really understand the full extent of what had happened, but that was the only place. If you go a little bit further down into Gano Street, there were no Cape Verdeans. You go left or right, there were no Cape Verdeans. They seemed to just be concentrated in that building. Mr. Brito was the person who made that possible, was able to give me my very first bike in the United States so that we can actually ride consistently to that building. So over time, now I work as a director for the Diversity, Equity, Inclusion, and Belonging Department for the City of Providence, where we've done a lot of work around the road to reparations and some of the initiatives that some of you have heard of from the last few years. And it very much ties to the story of Fox Point. One of the first places where we arrived. This is where we also hold the Cape Verdean Independence Festival every year. I was the chair of the Cape Verdean Heritage Subcommittee that plans the Cape Verdean Festival each year. I hope you're able to come out this year. But it's been held at Fox Point for that very reason. There's a historical connection. One time we ended up at Temple of Music, which was beautiful, but immediately felt the disconnect. So the Fox Point community continues to thrive in some bizarre ways, but really now infused and dispersed throughout Providence and neighboring cities.
Yeah. Following up on that question, I would love to hear about each of your experiences with sound and music in Providence, and especially in the Fox Point area. You know, Tiny, I know your father and your aunt and a lot of your family were major figures in the Fox Point Cape Verdean music scene throughout the 20th century. And I was curious, like, what was your experience of the Fox Point soundscape growing up? And then how did that kind of carry over into your career with the Tavares and into your own personal musical journey?
Well, it was infused by a lot of different directions. When we first began singing, my father was playing behind us. He had his guitar. We would sit in with him and Auntie Vicky, or we would do shows at the Boys Club or at any of the cultural function halls that they would allow us in. We started out singing doo-wop. My brother John actually infused that into our family with a lot of the old, the hot tones, the flamingos, the deltones. It was numerous artists that were out in those days. That's where we picked up our style of music when it came to branching away from Cape Verdean music. But our Cape Verdean music was pretty much where we got our roots, and then we kind of moved on into listening to the Motown sound. My brother Ralph was in the military, and when he came back from being in the airborne division, he brought Motown. He brought Curtis Mayfield and the Impressions. There were so many acts back in those days that the music became a part of us. Stevie Wonder, when he was only the 12-year-old genius. We grew up on all of that, and learned all of my father and my aunt's music. They did a different style as I'm sure a lot of people have listened to my mom, my dad, and my mom, and my father, and my aunt, when they sang, they created their own version of Cape Verdean. A lot of the music that you hear from Cesaria or from other artists from the Cape Verdean, it's Cape Verde itself, came into the realization that American Cape Verdean music kind of switched up, so to speak, because when my dad sang his versions of Saudade de Sunny Cloud, it was nothing like Bana or any of the other artists in those days.
So there's an argument to be made that, you know, Fox Point was its own site for intangible cultural heritage, and for musical and sonic heritage, because of all that confluence of influences that you're talking about, right? Like both the Cape Verdean influences, and all these different sounds that Flash and Vicky were drawing on, but also, you know, jazz and swing and these other American sounds, and Black American sounds that people were drawing on.
Yeah, my father really took to rhythm and blues. My aunt Vicky followed a lot of the jazz female vocalists in those days, Etta James and Ella Fitzgerald. They at some point in time began to I would guess immerse that style into Cape Verdean style. My aunt Vicky performed with a couple of the big bands, and going forward from there, she did a recording with Phil Barboza, which gave her some recognition, and then they toured pretty much the United States. Actually, both of them went to Cape Verde at one point. I'm not familiar with whether or not they performed, but I would think they definitely sat in, and because when in Cape Verde you do as the Cape Verdeans do. I've been there, and you sit and before you know it, you become a part of the makeup of the neighborhood. You're performing. People break out their guitars and their mandolins and all the great stuff, and get to play and get to singing. But Dad kind of, he loved listening to Wes Montgomery and Duke Ellington. So, they got influenced by other sounds, regardless of whether or not they wanted to keep their the Cape Verdean sound as a vibrant part of their performance.
Yeah, absolutely. And Silas, I was curious also about, your experience of Cabo Verdean sound and music in Providence throughout your life, and kind of the legacy in what you're continuing to do with leading Grupo Ondas and all of this. Yeah.
Yeah, for me, I spend a lot of time around musicians. Some of them are sitting right here in the audience. And I've always had a hard time thinking of myself as a musician, because I always thought about it as almost like a responsibility, being Cape Verdean and growing up where music was central to everything that you did. There was nowhere that I went that we didn't have people playing at Quebra Canela, which is our local beach, or you go into the Praça and there are people playing drums, or someone with an accordion for some reason. I don't know how you can carry that box around all day. And when I came to the United States, what's interesting is that in our home, we were strongly encouraged not to speak Cape Verdean language when I came here. My brother and I actually were targeted very early on for sounding different and looking different in our elementary school in Massachusetts. One of the reasons why we actually moved to Providence. And part of protecting us was don't speak the Cape Verdean language, master the English language. Ironically, music was playing in the house in Cape Verdean all the time. So that's a little confusing, parents, and I could hear some of those shifts because the Cape Verdean music that was being played at home didn't completely sound like what I had grown up with in the first 12 years of my life. But you could see that Cape Verdeans have always been chameleons in some way. and always having to adapt because we are a community of the diaspora. There are significantly more Cape Verdeans living outside of Cape Verde than in Cape Verde. We only have about 450 to 500,000 Cape Verdeans. In Cape Verde, we have more Cape Verdeans here. And the music is sort of a thread, but we also have the 9 different islands representing the music in very different ways. And so from the very beginning, when I was trying to play around with music and trying to recover some of that, it seemed like some kind of a neurological confusion for me. So people kept saying, you do this thing called maybe traderno, so they threw it at me as a joke, which means like traditional and modern mix. And to this day, that's actually the name of my project, where I do music because it makes me feel home every time I play my keyboard. And folks like Tony Sancho over here, who opened up his door 2000, this is like almost 25 years ago, to say, yeah, like this sounds, it's you, so just come on in and let's record and let's see where we go with that. So my relationship with Cape Verdean music has been one of quite an adventure and a journey through other cultures and connections. And in terms of Grupo Ondas, that's our international center, if you will. It started off as the Brazilian and Cape Verdean Cultural Center of Rhode Island. And then our logo now is Pangea, which is when the continents used to be all one, because we have folks from various different cultures, Portuguese, Irish, people from the United States, so on and so forth. So it's become more of a place where we experiment. Our capoeira music is something that's a little bit different. It is ours. Our Cape Verdean music by default would also be that. Hopefully you'll hear some of it. You'll be like, I think that's Cape Verdean for sure. But it's not necessarily typical, and I struggle to find a quote-unquote traditional Cape Verdean musician today. I actually call them more typical. I have a weird relationship, just for the record, with the idea of tradition. I don't think tradition is a thing of the past. I think tradition is a thing of the present, of people looking back. Because no one was there making soup going, I'm building tradition. They just happened to make their soup. Right? I don't think they were like, I am dressing traditional clothes. They just wore their clothes. So when I see Cape Verdean performances, music, and they're always like rolling up their pants or kind of untucking a shirt, I have a weird relationship with that, because I'm not sure that's Cape Verdean. That's the work that had to happen. And when you say I'm wearing traditional clothing, are you talking about what? 1600 Cape Verde? 1500? 1700? 1800? Where did the tradition get established? And the music for me is in that same sort of boat. I think you dig into the soul, people can become Cape Verdean. Be careful. It's possible. You can get infused with some Cape Verdeanness, and that's part of the beauty of Cape Verdean music, is that it really pushes boundaries.
Awesome. Yeah, absolutely.
All right. So keeping all of this history and first voice experience in mind, I'd love to turn to the question of reparations. Silas, you've been active with DEI policy making in Providence in recent years and involved with the work of the Providence Reparations Commission. What does that policy look like at the municipal level, especially in relationship to the Cape Verdean community? Is Providence truly amending its fraught relationship with Cape Verdeans?
Ooh. That's a loaded question. Is it amended? You know, the idea behind reparations is such a complex one. It's one that really needs to be taken to the national level. But we dared, as Providence, to have that conversation at the municipal level. Atrevidos, you know what I mean? So we were like, okay, well, let's get that conversation started. The African American Ambassadors Group was the group that came to the table and asked to make sure that we were centering Black and African descendants in the conversation. And we started that process. In terms of a policy, as of right now, there's no like very specific policy in place, but there is a series of programs, services that have been put in place to make sure that people of African descent, people of indigenous descent, people who are also affected by COVID in a very disproportionate way, in poverty and in certain parts that they call the census tract areas of Providence where we had the highest rates of infection, came to the table. The former mayor, Mayor Lorza, set aside $10 million to support these kinds of programs. And that's where a lot of that is. The current administration, Mayor Smiley, continues to honor that $10 million and is working with United Way of Rhode Island to make sure that the monies get to the hands of the organizations that can do that work, to be able to monitor it and then be able to report on those effects. So about a little bit over $3 million is with United Way and almost $7 million with Providence to actually be disseminated. In terms of Cape Verdeans in particular, one place where I think the conversation didn't necessarily center Cape Verdean, but it definitely incorporated Cape Verdeans was in the eligibility criteria and what did we mean by African descent. So typically when we're talking about Black racial classification category in the US, it tends to be used synonymously with African American, but we know that there's much more nuance there. So in the conversation, the commissioners that were appointed by the city of Providence and by, that's the mayor and the city council, made sure that they got into the nuances. So the African descendants became also includes Afro-Caribbean, Afro-Latinos, Cape Verdeans, African Americans, so on and so forth. So that it started this conversation about when we say people of African descent, what are we actually talking about?
Right.
And when we talk about Latinos, we almost exclusively remove them from the category of African descent. If we look at the history of colonization, obviously there's a lot more overlap. So that's one of the areas where we can continue to see more conversation as we go forward. The African American Ambassadors Group is still active. We have an Cape Verdean American and Cape Verdean Ambassadors Group. We have a Latino Ambassadors Group and other emerging ones that surely are going to continue to come together to make sure that this conversation about what reparations could really look like, really at the national level, at the state level, and then eventually here at the local level, can be something that has a solid foundation.
Absolutely. Yeah, and just kind of a follow-up for you or for Tiny. I'd love to hear from both of you about, Brown University specifically, having taken part in that history of gentrification in Fox Point, and pushing that community out, and displacing these Cape Verdean families. Like, what should the university be doing, and what can the university do? And beyond just starting with a conversation, which is where we're at now.
You want to start with this one?
Yeah.
What they could do for me is give me my 40 and a horse. I'm just kidding. I'll take 20. No, well, we experienced a lot, even during performances. It was always some type of racial discord. As young men, some of us were militant. Not really saying I was, but I guess I kind of stood on that line. And we faced a lot of adversity when it came to. I know my parents, my uncles and aunts, and when they wanted to invest, there was always that blockade. But as soon as we moved away, then other people were, other races were allowed to invest. I've had it happen to me many times. Fortunately, because of the business I was in, we were afforded the opportunity to get into real estate. But it was always with a stipulation that you can't own that. Or I wanted to develop a lot that I owned that actually could sustain 19 to 20 units, and they blocked it. And then as soon as I gave it up, they let someone else almost build exactly the same exact floor plan. So it shows you, no matter what, there's always that, that adverse community that won't allow you to grow. My parents, my uncle was fortunate enough to finally be able to buy into real estate, but it was because he was a stevedore. And went hand in hand, Cape Verdean music and the stevedores. You probably heard them singing at the boats all the time, and the same thing throughout the neighborhood. But like I said, when I grew up in Fox Point, there wasn't a block area that didn't have someone playing his guitar or someone playing their congas or any other instrument just to beat out the time. So as far as what we were not allowed because of places like Brown University, it happened everywhere.
Yeah.
I'll ask you some layered stuff. So I worked for Brown for a while at the Center for Alcohol and Addiction Studies before I went to teach at Tufts University, the Department of Education. I was there full time for 12 years. And I'm bringing them up because in the conversations, in the research that you do, you look into historical context when you're thinking about equity, inclusion, and belonging. That's one of the first places you have to go is, how did we get here? And these are some of the institutions that are complicit in a lot of the things that have happened. Now, is it a blame game? No. But you have to think about when were they established. So if you look at the date of establishment of these institutions, you're talking about being established before once a slave, always a slave doctrine came out in 1857. Or separate but equal, 1896. These institutions were already like engines, right, of our communities. We don't have desegregation until 1954. Civil rights until 1964. Now these institutions are like 100 years old. What do we expect? Of course, we're going to look into the engines and see how the concepts of whiteness, and this is to be separated from individuals who are racialized white, right? The idea behind whiteness, the power structures that were put in place. And the question is whether or not institutions like Brown is ready now and are bringing the necessary people to the table to help them deconstruct some of that and be very honest about how we've gotten to the places that we are. And I have been living in Providence. I've been a Providence resident since 1991, and you can see what's happened. And then that's not even going into the red line maps where entire communities were flattened. We can see it. It's available to us, and it's very difficult to talk about those. Sometimes we think it's about we're trying to assign blame, or we think that Brown needs to own all of it. No, it was very much functioning within what was allowed. Most of what happened was, quote unquote, legal. But we have to look at laws from definitely a more nuanced way, because it was that very same law that we trust wholeheartedly that would consider someone like me 3/5 of a person. That was built into the US Constitution. I wouldn't have been considered a full person. So think about it from that historical perspective. Add the layer of cultural sensitivity, because also the double-edged swordness of it all, as Brown is very aware, if you just group people by these racial categories today, which are concepts created in like the 1770s, you lose a lot of that nuance. And then Cape Verdeans, for example, get completely lost in the conversation, which is why we're virtually invisible in places like Providence. One of the first questions I received was, what are you? By a teacher when I came to the US. They look at you and they're like, Latino, black, I don't know, I can't make you out. And then it preoccupies the mind. And then they want to put us and shove us into these little boxes. But no, not all black people are the same. There's a lot of nuance there. Cape Verdeans may be part of that. And I say may, because there are such things as Cape Verdeans who are racialized and experience the world from a very different racial lens. Not all white people are the same. Not all Latinos can be grouped across like 50 plus countries and you expect to learn about them. So this is the kind of work that we're expecting Brown University to be doing. And that whole idea of letting Brown or the Tufts of the world self-educate. Actually, maybe it's time to bring other people in to educate you. And can you humble yourself as an institution like this to say, maybe that's the part that we don't understand and we need help to be able to do that. So that's it.
Yeah. Sitting with those words. And yeah, I mean, you know, one thing that I'm thinking about in terms of, you know, action, in terms of, you know, Brown's history and this history of gentrification, you know, you were both talking about music as this site for community, music as a gathering space, music as something that fills the spaces and places that you call home. And that, you know, that is one of the losses of this gentrification process is some of those gathering spaces. And so I wanted to think about like music and sound as a form of reparation. Is that even possible, right? What elements of musical culture were disrupted and displaced throughout the Fox Point gentrification? How do Cape Verdeans continue to carry on those legacies in spite of that history of displacement? And then, you know, Tiny, I'd really love to hear about your current work with recording your father's music as kind of a part of that legacy.
Well, and even in recording, you know, my father's style of Cape Verdean, I run into that blockade from those who sing it differently. If you came from Cape Verde, you sang as a Cape Verdean should sing. We came from the U.S. My grandparents migrated here, but they, you know, one of them was my mom's side was fortunate enough that they were able to buy land in Massachusetts in the Wareham area, a little town called Tremont. So that gave them a specific style of growth as well. But their whole side of the family became farmers. My father's side of the family became factory workers, shipyard workers. Those who didn't go, those who went into the military came back and found what kind of work they could find. As far as our music, the music that I sing by my mom, my father, my mom, because my mom was also a singer, even though she didn't go out professionally. My Aunt Vicky and my Aunt Enos were the ones who pretty much sang Cape Verdean music as what we know Cape Verdean music to be. Again, the dialect is a little bit stray of what actual Cape Verdean, because I've been to Cape Verde and I've listened to the music there, and it's like, that's not the way we sing it, you know. And when I indulge with friends of mine like Candida or some, I took Candida to Cape Verde with me for her first trip, and it's again, you experience a totally different style of music, including, you know, everything, music, food, everything, across the board was strange to us because we didn't grow up with that. I grew up with and in Fox Point where they spoke it, but again, like Silas says, they didn't really want us to. In our case, I'm glad he stuck with it and learned. We weren't allowed to even learn it, and it got to the point where it was just a secret language for us. So we sang it, as I told you before. I can sing it all, but it's all phonetic.
So music becomes this site for carrying the language, even when, you know, when speaking it is so basically frowned upon. Yeah, right.
I think, you know, part of what we're talking about here is reflective of wounds that diasporic communities sometimes carry. When you have to go into a host or a dominant culture and have to make do, and you know that here in the United States, if you don't speak the English language, it just makes it significantly harder, and our parents knew that, and they needed to put things in place to try to protect us. At the music level, I think that our communities, in this case here we're talking about Cape Verdeans, have to also exercise a little bit of grace with our diasporic communities, because people think that Cape Verde and these other cultures where people are immigrating from kind of live in this bubble and they're stuck in time or something. My great aunt or my aunt that came here in the 1970s and speaks the Cape Verdean language fluently and has that beautiful sound from Brava. But then you go to Brava and you go, oh, they don't sound like that. And could it be that Cape Verde continued to change? You know? Could it be that the country is going to continue to find new ways, especially after its independence, and find its own path? But then can the Cape Verdean country also be respectful of the fact that other people have different waters to chart? Like that's a conversation we need to have. It's much like talking about language, right? So how many people here are familiar with how knecht became knight? Or how participation became participation? Anyone know, who can tell real quick, like, how did that happen? 300 years of French rule in England might do it. Over a Germanic people that just couldn't pronounce université, so it became university. They couldn't pronounce certain words because of their tongue, and then it just sort of modified. It's not an accident that almost 70% of English is French. It's a French Creole. But, the 300+ million that have been spent by United States and England to make sure that we never call English a Creole might have something to do with that. Why would you want to put it down there with the other Creoles of the world, right? So what I'm saying here is that music is tethered to language much of the time, not always, because you have instrumental kind of thing. When you hear an instrumentalist playing from like 70s and today, you go, wow, they're like virtual deck. But then the pronunciation and the rhythm and all of that, the idea that music and language gets better and evolve with time, I'm actually going to push back a little bit and say, it doesn't, it just changes. And can you be okay with that? With the fact that language just changes because it meets the needs of the people in that time, in that context? You really think if I asked my grandparents or my parents that the music of that time was somehow lesser than today, they would say, of course not. Because at that time, it's what they needed. And we have to be okay with that. And in a community like ours, that is literally like everywhere. Everywhere. I've met Cape Verdeans from at least 120 countries. And I know that there are more. I just haven't met them. And how can we allow people to kind of come together and understand that no matter how we cut it, when we're talking about like Cape Verdean music, I say let Yoruba and Ndongo cultures flourish, because that's all we are doing. We are manifestations, and we're trying to keep some of that identity that was almost robbed completely from us. So when you hear Coladeira Samba in Cape Verde, you go to Brazil and you hear samba, you hear batuku, and then you go to Trinidad. Why is it that we sound so similar? It's because our music and our cultures have existed despite all of the experiences with colonization, not because of it. It is a way of surviving. We make sure that it does. So really, when I look at Cape Verdeans and the way that we feel, the way we sing and talk, our rhythms, and then you go, that's Ndongo culture, that is Yoruba culture, because why is it that we would be taken up from our land as Yoruba or Ndongo or Bantu people, get brought up into these places and be like, this place is called Cape Verde, you're Cape Verdean now, you're no longer Yoruba. You get taken out of your land, you go and be like, this is Jamaica, you're Jamaican now, you're no longer Yoruba. What sense does that make anywhere in the world? Only people that have experienced colonization, and then there was a plan to make sure that they lost their identity, would experience that. So really, all we're doing, no Cape Verdean, and I'm saying this to all the Cape Verdeans who are listening around the world, no Cape Verdean has it right. No Cape Verdean has it right. There is no correct Cape Verdean, just like there is no correct one anything. Where do they speak correct Portuguese? Is it Portugal? Well, I call it wrong Spanish. How about that? Oh, is it Spain that speaks right Spanish? Well, no, that's wrong Italian. Is it the Italians that got it? No, that's wrong Indo-European. It will never end if we play that game.
Yeah.
It's going to continue to change to the needs of a community. And I think the best thing we can do for making sure that Cape Verdeans continue to thrive and stay tethered to their history, to their culture, and to their land is to make sure you allow them space to do that in whatever ways that it shows up.
Beautiful, beautiful. Tiny, before we wrap up, I know you had said that you might have wanted to share some of the words and sounds of your family history in this space. So I just wanted to open up space for you to be able to do that, if that's what you wanted to do.
Sure. Are we able to put the some of the interviews and video footage on? There's one thing I wanted to also point out was even when we were performing on the road and when we started recording for record companies, they always seemed to have a different feel about us. It was like, well, you're not R&B, you're not jazz, you're not, so as Silas says, they were trying to pigeonhole us into even our music they didn't want us to be who we were. We learned by singing Cape Verdean. It's like those who learn to sing in church. Gospel singers have a totally different approach to how they perform their music. And I think that showed up in how we performed our music because we learned through our Cape Verdean culture. We learned how to harmonize because my father was a musician and my brother John gave us that knowledge of it. And then, the rest of the family infused whatever they brought along. My brother Chubby was always out performing by himself in a lot of cases and would develop groups. I think the music that my father is going to, if you listen to that, I would think you'd say, it sounds Cape Verdean, but lyrically, it's not Cape Verdean. Play some.
Yeah, so Tiny, if you're able to share your screen on the Zoom, we were thinking that you could share some of those videos that you had been interested in sharing.
You want me to play them from my end?
Yes, I think that's what would be easiest.
Oh, okay. I thought we were playing the links and pieces I sent you. I misunderstood that then.
Small miscommunication. It happens.
That's okay. That's okay. So, in order to share my screen with you, first of all, I need to go back to I sent them to you by email, correct?
Mm-hmm. You did.
Okay, 1 second. Let me just pull while I'm just bouncing around here. 1 second.
And maybe while you're doing that, we could have Silas speak a little bit about the kind of concept that's going to lead us into the workshop, which is this concept of tereru. So and how it relates to this concept of music as survival, music as community.
I'll start with something that I think has become relatively commonplace in the last few years, this word Ubuntu. How many have heard Ubuntu? How many grew up hearing it? Why now, right? How did it come in? It's been part of, was that? You get to quote it. We got to have scholars in the room. Right? And this is a concept that's been around for a very long time. It's been around as long as these civilizations have existed, to describe this idea that fundamentally brings people together of a community. And I'm going to leave you with a challenge and then bridge over to the music part. A challenge is go back and look at the history of Africa, not just Egypt, okay? Before colonization that we currently talk about, before the 1490s. Go and look at how much poverty we didn't have, or the fact that we didn't have homelessness or unhoused people that there was always a place for someone to stay. The idea that I cannot be okay if an extended member of myself, my community member, is not okay. Which is actually one of the things that Cape Verdeans really struggle with all over the world, is because when you go out into the United States or different parts of the globe, when you start to make it, that money is not just yours, right? It belongs to really, very often, your entire family. I can't climb this wall that has been erected for all kinds of reasons to my exclusion. I get to the top of the wall, and then I just go, oh, look at all my siblings and my family, and jump over to the other side, right? Ubuntu is about bringing people together, and at the very core, this thing, for whatever beautiful reason, again, despite all of the ugliness that had been experienced by our folks, we didn't lose it. This idea of community, this idea of being part of one thing, the fact that we're not trying to outplay each other when we're part of the same band, that we're trying to synergize and complement one another. So things like the Tejeru, where we spent a lot of time talking about our successes and victories and our struggles, was a shared experience, which is why people cry to this day when one person is singing a song. It's a very emotional thing. You see it in capoeira. You see it in Kalinda in Trinidad. You will see it in parts of the Caribbean that you least expect, that somehow this value, this principle survived. So what we're going to talk about a little bit later, and as we do a demonstration, I will invite you to come and join, is to actually disrupt that idea of performance, right? As proscenium stage, you're sitting there, and then we kind of do this thing. You either like it or you not like it, as opposed to how do we kind of get involved. So that's the concept that we're going to play with a little bit.
All right.
How you doing over there, Tom?
Yeah.
I found one of the songs that I sent to you. I'm not sure just how it's going to. Are you sharing? Are you getting my screen?
Not at the moment.
Okay. Talk me through.
So at the bottom of your screen, there should be something that says share screen. Oh, okay. Now we're getting we're getting ourselves. It's like a.
And the shot looks amazing, by the way, Tiny, from here.
Oh no. Okay. Well, okay. Yeah. So while we're waiting for that, let's maybe go ahead and jump into some Q&A from all of you. So yeah, does anyone have a question at this moment for Silas? But I'm hopefully for Tiny in just a couple minutes.
I think I'm back.
Oh, you're back! Yay! Okay.
Thanks for the save.
But I need to. Well, I don't know what button was I pressed, but it wasn't share my screen. All right.
Yeah.
So, what would you suggest? Okay, I got a share button. Let me see. Share image from file document. Camera. Are you seeing it now?
We're still seeing you.
All right, but I want to see if it's going to allow me to play that music that I had pulled up. Let's see.
Okay.
We'll try.
That's true. Yeah. Yeah.
I have Flash and Vicky. Let's see if it plays.
All right.
This is the medley. Are you hearing that?
Not hearing anything right now.
You're not hearing it. Okay, so it's not sharing audio for some reason.
Yeah, if you want to get out of share screen and then just play it, and we can while staying on the Zoom, we can maybe try
Okay.
to hear it that way.
I just unshared the screen, so is it possible I can do it now?
Yes, just try to play it, and we'll see if we can hear it.
See what happens. You're hearing it?
Not hearing anything.
One other option is
Are you hearing that?
no. The one other
Not
option I
yet.
can think of is when you click on share screen,
Yeah.
at the bottom left-hand corner, there's usually a checkbox that says share computer
Share
sound.
Yeah.
Okay, one second.
Click on that and see if that helps.
Let me get back to share screen.
Is our grandchild in the house?
What was that?
Someone said, "Is there a grandchild in the house?"
No grandchildren. Actually, they learned from their grandfather. I'm the teacher in that respect. Okay, so I got share screen. I think the last time I hit camera, and that's what caused it.
Okay, and do
So
share
let's try
share
that.
sound if you can.
And choose. Well, it didn't give me a choice for sound though. It just said choose to share screen. Allow display over other apps. Yeah, that's set. So
Yes. Oh, okay. Can you?
what?
Oh, okay. Tiny, could you
Yep.
send? Oh, okay. Well, we're seeing something.
You have the file.
Right. Yeah. Oh, okay.
How about
Give
this?
it give it a play. Nothing. Oh my gosh.
Got it?
Could you share it?
The link.
Could you share a link in the chat of the Zoom, and then we can play it from our
Say
end?
again.
Could you put a link in the chat, and then we could share it on our end?
Okay, let me go back to. Well, actually, that I sent you that file by email,
Right.
and it's not a link. I can give you the other link for the interview. That would be something that we could share. Hold on
Yeah,
one
that'd be
second.
great.
Let's see if this is it.
All right. You can stop sharing your screen.
Okay.
Yeah.
1 second. I'm still the same. Let's get back to.
That's true. Yeah, that's true. We could do that.
Play that guitar?
All right. Well, back where I started from. Now
All right.
you want me
We
to
can-
send you the file of the
Yeah.
link?
So, Tiny. So what we're gonna
Yeah.
do is we're gonna move into Q&A, and
Okay.
if and when we start the workshop, when you get a chance, just send a file just to me, and we'll make a way to make it play in this room at the end of the event.
All righty.
All
I'm
right.
going to send you those files. I'll send you the links.
Thank you all for your patience. Are there any questions now that you've had ample time to think about what has been said?
We also welcome vicious attacks. And
Not at
push
me,
back
please.
against anything.
I received one already when it came to the grandchildren. like old people can't do technology.
Touche.
Can't teach no dog new tricks.
Oh, we have a question in the middle.
what do you both think the future of Cape Verdean music looks like locally? Maybe in the next 5 to 10 years.
I think Cape Verdean music is rounding back to its beginnings more than it is moving away from it. Younger people, of course, always come with new styles. As we grew up in the music business, you know, everything got replaced by something at some point in time, and then you moved on, but then you go back, because if it didn't get replaced properly, as a lot of people like to say, why are they sampling our music? Ergo, they're sampling our music because it was the right music to play back then, and it's still the right music to play now. I think Cape Verdean music is going to transcend back to its roots.
And I think that there's definitely a lot of evidence right now. I've seen more Marna events in the last year or two than I have in quite some time. And I think we'll still continue to have a really wide range of genre. Right? We have, again, I'm going to bring Tony Kidd over here into the fold. He introduced Cape Verdean rock, right, with Narcotics, and really beautiful fan group across the globe, because there's always this, I think, this desire for Cape Verdeans to, again, test those limits, because we are such an amalgamation of peoples, right? I was born and raised in Cape Verde. My parents were raised in Cape Verde. My dad was born on a boat to one of the islands. And my heritage is German, Portuguese, Egyptian, Italian, Cape Verdean, Senegalese, and Indian. And that's not like just uncommon thing for Cape Verdeans, because we were also a center for a lot of the trade that happened. So I think we're going to continue to tap into those really wide ranges of ourselves to make sure that things like our music continues to have the variability. But I agree with Tiny as well that there's this constant trying to not lose the essence of what Cape Verdeans know is Cape Verdean. It's kind of like if someone starts to speak the English language and you were born and raised here and you breathed it in. As soon as you hear an English that's not probably from these borders, you can kind of tell. Yet a person who came into this culture would have a harder time being able to tell those kinds of nuances. There is such a thing as Cape Verdeanness. In fact, we talk about that, Cabo Verdeanidad. It's like something that Cape Verdeans feel, and that is true for a lot of different cultures. And I think that in our music, the same is reflected. I hope we continue to innovate. I hope we continue to push the limits, but try to also not lose our roots. Thanks for that question.
Hi, everyone. So I cannot decouple music from dance. And I remember my parents meeting on Benefit Street at a Cape Verdean dance. So with that said, the festival. I know that we've tried to mix music up, and there was always either it was too much of the current genre of Cabo Verdean music, or there wasn't enough of the tradition, and I'm air quoting, traditional music. So Silas, can you speak a little bit about that? Because I know you were a part of, with the festival, really trying to find that right mix so there was a sound that everyone could relate to.
Yeah, that's been always a challenge with the Cape Verdean Festival, right? Making sure that we have the full range represented. And I think it goes back to asking our Cape Verdean community to also exercise that grace. For us to teach our young folks that there is no one Cape Verdean music, that there is no one way to be a Cape Verdean, and make that a very explicit part of our conversation. Because when we start to hear folks like Norberto Tavares, who's one of my favorite artists that I grew up with, who created the anthem that I sing for Cape Verdean independence. I don't sing the anthem that we have for the Cape Verdean. That's a really complicated, getting really into like the political scene. But that's the one that I grew up singing. And when people play that, they're like, the old music, right? Obviously, there's something lagging in us Cape Verdeans getting together and having a conversation about what we mean about being Cape Verdean and the nuances of it all. So yes, it becomes a pretty significant issue. We continue to think about it. Right now, we're doing it as a very simple surface fix. If we have communities from 1970s and 80s and 90s and 2000s, we'll grab a few artists from here and here and here, and then it will just kind of keep everyone happy, right? But we need to have conversations about how we continue to devalue the music of different generations, because we actually believe that music somehow gets better with time. Mm-hmm. If it gets better with time, please tell me that you have stopped moving when you hear Michael Jackson music. Like you're like, no, there's something, it is timeless. Good music is good music. That's sort of my piece on that. I think it's really important that we respect those sort of roots, and we have to have conversations with our young generation about that. And for our older generation, we also need to have that conversation, because they're like, that's not music. What do you mean? So how are we gonna have this conversation one way? If we're trying to also say that this is really important aspects of our culture, it's across the board, because people feel music differently. And being a Cape Verdean in 2024 is going to mean something very different in the music scene than when we were growing up in the 1970s. So we'll continue to try to be as creative as we can. And when we hold those sessions, when we say, folks, come talk to us about what you want to hear and why, but also get into the root of why we're at each other's throats about representation of music, that people show up to have those conversations.
I saw someone else up there previously. Okay, we've got a couple.
Awesome. Hello, I have thoughts and a question. So I think in terms of seeing a Cape Verdean community at Brown, there are people, at the BCSC, at health services, especially at dining, but I think there are barely any Cape Verdean students here, and I'm very proud to say that I'm maybe one of the few. But it's a very isolating experience. And I think the most community that I found at Brown, and something I'm still seeking to find, is with other Lusophone communities, the Brazilian community especially. So I'm very interested in hearing sort of how you've found home in other communities and sort of what your experiences have been around that.
I feel like I'm doing a lot of talking, so I'll let Tiny jump in on this one.
Well, I just sent the links. I think it's a difficult road to traverse when you're trying to hold on to heritage. I have family in Australia, also last name Tavares, and we communicate all the time with regard to where their music is and where our music is, and they want to know more of our music than they want to know of theirs. So I don't know who stops it from the growth, if that was helpful in your question, but I was a little busy sending out the links. Check your links. Really?
I'll say something about home. I think that question is really critical, because when we think about home, we continue to think about these very concrete physical spaces and not sort of I'm going to put a concept out, existential homelessness that people feel at times, especially when they're uprooted from certain areas or have to live in a diaspora for various reasons, and not meeting the embrace that they're hoping for from their communities. The piece on feeling incredibly isolated is something that resonates. At Tufts University, we had a very small group of Cape Verdeans as well. And again, it goes back to the question about the responsibility of institutions and being very proud to say we're a predominantly white institution. I always question that, because I'm like, can you point to the part of some of these institutions that are not white? Talk about whiteness, again, not about individuals, racialized white, but when you look at Brown, what part of it is not? You mean just say white and then own the fact that there's a lot of work that needs to be done in that reconciliation and the repair. And when you know that there are students living in isolation, you can guess that by virtue of these big disconnects in the demographics. What are you doing about that? How are you trying to bring people together? I was the Cape Verdean Student Association president back in URI, and even though we had a pretty good number of Cape Verdeans, we went out looking for the folks that were isolated because we didn't have enough Jamaicans. We didn't have enough people from Trinidad. We didn't have enough people from Barbados. Reaching out to them from the island perspective to make sure that they feel a little bit more home, but we were the only ones doing that. We have to take a little bit more ownership. We have to take a little bit more responsibility to make sure that Ubuntu is actually alive and not just a thing that we say. We have to live it. And part of living it is not being okay when somebody else who's part of our community is not doing okay. We should not be accepting that.
Any other questions? More questions?
Awesome.
Thank you. You speak about the space that people need to have an opportunity to preserve the music, and I'm wondering if there's been any, I know that you mentioned $10 million that the city has set aside to address some of these issues. Is there any studio time that's provided for people who want to record their music? Are there copyright workshops educating people about their legal rights? Are there trademark consultation types of workshops going on? I know that I appreciate artists so much, but I know how difficult it is for them to earn a living, and we don't seem to put things in place for new artists, and even, I'm sure Tiny can attest to, it's difficult for even a popular family that's been in the music industry in the way they have been to really benefit, to profit financially from that. So if there haven't been things like that put in place, I think that that's an idea that maybe you could consider.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll keep it short. So for the 10 million that you're referring to, the commissioners, the 13 commissioners that were appointed by the mayor and city council, they're the ones who decided where the 10 million actually went. There was a component around black media, which might have a small component around that, but we also have a department, at least in Providence, the Arts, Culture, and Tourism, directed by Joe Wilson Jr., who is an artist, who was a director of the Trinity Rep and an actor that's trying to ensure that these kinds of programmings that you're talking about are in place, because they're really critical, not only for the music scene and for the artist living, but also how it's tethered to people's identities, cultural identity in particular.
Maybe we can take, like one more question and then see if we can get one of these clips going before we move into the workshop.
I believe my question was pretty much similar to the woman behind me. And what, Silas, this question is for you. What do you believe the relationship with Providence and Brown University with the Cape Verdean musical community, what do you see it in the future? How do you see it coming together and moving forward for the Cape Verdean community here in Providence? I know the art scene is getting pretty big here in Providence. How is the Cape Verdean music community going to be involved, infused in that as well, with these other projects with Providence and Brown University?
I think that the opportunity is actually really large, because Brown pulls for more than just Providence. It's located in Providence, but Greater Providence has a pretty significant Cape Verdean community in Pawtucket, Central Falls, parts of Cumberland and Woonsocket, Cranston, East Providence, North Providence. So we're really surrounded by this community on all ends. And I'm hoping that Brown University and other universities have been coming to the table with the current administration to really think about how they can be contributing back to the community that they belong to, not just be thinking about ways of taking back or taking away, right, and expanding. This idea of expansion is putting a lot of stressors on things like housing, and housing negatively impacts a lot of our artists who are living paycheck to paycheck, and they're getting pushed out into other areas or out of the homes where they grew up. So there is a lot of possibilities, there's a lot of opportunities for people to come together and synergize, but it's really going to come down to people feeling like they're in fact accountable to these communities. That part I'm not as hopeful that we're close to that for certain institutions to say, okay, we've actually done harm, and part of our responsibility is to, one, stop the harm, right? Keep it from happening again, and then building mechanisms for ensure that we're working towards reconciliation and healing. A big thing that's happening in our Cape Verdean community, music, artists, otherwise, is a lot of focus on the trauma that people experience. And I'm also hoping that our institutions move beyond just looking at people through the lens of trauma. Trauma-informed care is the beginning, it is not the end. We don't need to be defining communities by the things that they have experienced. We need to move towards something that's along the lines of trauma healing engagement, not just trauma-informed care. This person, Silas, acts this way because he's a traumatized individual for X, Y, and Z reason, and then we leave it at that. We need to figure out what's happening next. And I think that music has always been, artists have always been at the forefront of almost any social change. There's not a single law, and please feel free to jump back, not a single law that I can think of in the United States that was sort of created by legislators just because it was a good idea. It was always a pushback from the beginning, from the very Constitution. It was a pushback against something else. It was a response to things like the Oyster War, or the fact that Articles of Confederation never really dealt with the issues that had to do with this land. All of our laws have been because of people. And when we talk about laws and cases, we lose the story of people behind them. And that's part of what we need to do, sort of rehumanize processes and let artists and musicians guide some of that way.
So, have we made any progress on the on the video front?
I sent you the chat links.
Oh, you guys are ready to play? Oh, okay. So they're gonna play it from their end. All right. Awesome.
I think.
Vai, budisham, so cu lembrança, pra tudo minha vida, mas ai, que nunca nos encontrava, vamos sofrer dor, quem está a sofrer. Vai, budisham, so cu lembrança, pra toda minha vida, mas ai, que nunca nos encontrava, vamos sofrer dor, quem está a sofrer. Minha tristeza que está acabando, nunca me esperava, mas boa vai sem despedir. Vamos estar com o braço só aberto, te esperava, nunca me esperava, mas boa vai sentia minha tristeza. Flash Vieira.
Dopeness.
Tavares. I have to put that in too, you know.
So good.
I'm the father of the Tavares singing group, and I started playing in the small bar out front before this hall was even built. And we got our start at Holy Name, Gano Street, Power Street, you name it. We've had a good bringing up with all our Cape Verdean people.
Sacramento é um terra
de Deus, cidade que o céu nasceu, com uma remessa de gente sem bonito, para deixar tudo que o Senhor Deus nasceu, sem batir, saber que chorar, gente assim na minha vida cojar. Nos pagamentos, morabeza de gente, sentimento de sacramento, simbadilim, sabendo chorar, gente assim na minha vida cojar. Nos pagamentos, morabeza de gente, sentimento de sacramento, demonstrou esse caminho longe, demonstrou esse caminho para Santa Claus. When we started playing for the CV Club, it was just a bar up back. As a matter of fact, I don't think it was as big as it is now. But we enjoyed every single minute of it, and we're still enjoying playing for our people, no matter where we go. And our people appreciate what we do for them, and we appreciate their patronage. Saudade, Santa Claus.
So, yay.
Congrats, man. Congrats. Sweet.
And you should keep your eyes and ears out because Tiny will be releasing some of that music, some of his father and aunt's music in the future. He's going to kind of reimagine it and release it. So now we will be moving into the workshop portion of the event. So bear with us while we move these chairs, and then Silas and some of his group will take you through.
And we are going to ask you to come down here and join us. So just start stretching and mobilizing your body to be part of this energy, this sort of Ubuntu structure, if you will.
Yes.
All right. We'll modify the order a little bit because we're starting a little bit later. How many of you here are familiar with Batuku? Okay. How many are familiar with Kola Sonjong? How would you describe the difference? I kept it simple. I just asked about two. So how many of you are familiar with Kola? How about Colinha? Okay. So Kola, Colinha, Kola Sonjong, Sonjong, Batuku, Batuku Reza. How would you tell the difference? How would you explain it to a 5-year-old? Kind of hard, right? Because they all have the same sort of touch. I grew up in Chara Santo Antonio. We used to call it Toque de Batuco. And when they were playing Kola Sonjong, it'd be like, Toque de Batuco? Kola Sonjong? Ah, yeah, mesma coisa. That's how we used to sort of grow up. Because you're learning the same exact thing, but depending on where you go in the different islands, people then represent that feeling slightly different, right? It's like West Coast rap, East Coast rap. You still recognize it as rap and hip hop pretty quickly, but there's a feeling and a tenor, and you can become a musician and a scholar of it that's going to get into the nuances and the little details of it, but that feeling is the same. Like as soon as that music started, I think any Cape Verdean here would be like, that's so Cape Verdean. But then you're listening to like the riffs and you're like, man, hold on, that's like ragtime or something. It's like from somewhere down in like maybe parts of Chicago, I could hear all these other infusions in the ways that the notes were played or in the way that the vibrato of the voice was. Like you can start breaking that apart, but that feeling brings you home very, very quickly. So Batuku, what's interesting about it is that it has a very long history. Some of the scholarship will show you that the history can go back as far as about 500 years old. It's one of the oldest music that we have in Cape Verde. Anyone here know how Batuku started or ever heard of its origins? With the enslaved people in Brazil, in Cape Verde for sure. Batuku, by the way, was taken to parts of Brazil, Bahia, that eventually actually evolved into concepts of samba de roda, which is one version of samba. Then there's samba de carnaval, which is the one that you might see typically with people with huge feathers in Rio de Janeiro, for example. And they were trying to recover some of the roots of Ndongo traditions, which some of us call today samba. And if you listen to samba, like actual some of the more typical versions, you listen to samba de roda, you go, I can barely tell the difference if I didn't tell you which one was which. And when samba came back to Cape Verde, in the northern parts of Cape Verde, it started to become coladeira samba. And that's also around the time when so much of the northern islands of Cape Verde started to simulate a lot of the traditional things that were happening in Brazil. That's why we have a large carnival in Cape Verde. I think it's the second largest only to Brazil. Why is that? Why did Cape Verdeans try to mimic Brazil? Could it have anything to do with the fact that they recognize that same efforts of trying to recover or retain some of the things that they lost over a long colonization period? It's a little bit more complicated than just, oh, they're just copying Brazil. We share a story. They're basically our older sibling, if you will. So Batuku, and there are lots of nuances here. I have two musicians' eyes on me, so I'm mad nervous about this. Who made a living out of this kind of work. But Batuku is actually, it's simple, but it's not easy. Kind of like in the way that things can be complex and not complicated, right? It's beautiful in its simplicity. Cape Verdeans were not allowed to actually bring some of the original drums over from West Africa, parts that today we call Angola, the Ndongo regions. When they came over, they weren't allowed to recreate djembes, which people now see today all over the place with people like Sidi Maiga, who's a master drummer, and it's beautiful. But in Cape Verde, we weren't allowed to play that. Anyone know why? Huh? It was prohibited. Why? It was considered something of the devil. It was considered evil. And we were not allowed to touch. And this is not only true to Cape Verde. This is how parts of the cajon was created in Peru. This is how the Trinidadian pan actually happened in Trinidad. Very shared stories about the relationship to the drum that was considered to be a little bit too African. And so Cape Verdeans started to take pillows and anything that would make muffled sounds, put it between the legs, and try to simulate the sounds of the djembe, but they had to do it in a community. So each person kind of played a role, and then together it made this really kind of beautiful, trancing kind of sound. So we're going to try to do that today with clapping, and then you're welcome to also use your lap to do this. So I'm going to snap the pace, okay? So, or maybe I'll play it on my chest. So see if you can clap to this pace. Very nice, okay. Now, half of you are going to continue in that, and I'm going to have another half of you, let's say this side, that's going to do a different pace, a little bit faster, okay? So everyone's gonna do the one from, let's say, this midline over. I'm gonna split y'all. This line right here, so clap, clap. And on this side, tap, 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 tap. Now, Jay, that automatically mess half of the group up, because one group is doing this, and the other group was supposed to do. The other one is doing. The other group. It messes you up, one, because it's not a typical sort of Euro count. It's not like 4/4 or something like that. It's like maybe even a 3/4 or something like that. We don't get to like musical concepts, right? But because it's a little bit off and you're doing it on an upbeat, it can mess you up a little bit. But when you put it together, it gives you the two sounds. That's the very basic of batuku. So here's it together. I'm going to do both parts together. So you have the, and then you have the other one, which is a ta-ta-ta-ta-ta-ta-ta-ta-ta, usually played on your lap or on the pam-pam or something like that. Okay, or ciabatta, which is basically the pillow. And when you put it together, my two hands are going to do the different parts. And that's it. Now see if you can find one of the claps. So you're either gonna do the ta 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 pa 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 pa. Easy? That's it. That's it. Now you can find yourself when you're on a teherun, a group, which I'm about to ask you to come down. One person's just doing this one part. This is all you're kind of doing, and you might just make it more intense. The other one's doing this part. And there's a third part, which is cavalaria, which sounds almost like a horse galloping, so that it brings another dimension to it. But the idea is that you're just playing your part. Here in the US, including with myself, and when I do my music, because I'm by myself most of the time doing this, I kind of play the whole thing. But when you come together in the community, you're not all playing that. You're just playing your part. Let me ask you, if you're in a situation like that, what is that communicating to you? Stress. Especially if you're not used to doing that. What else? What's that? Being connected. Synergy. Teamwork. Believing that there's no such thing as a small part. There's no such thing. This idea of putting things way up here, way down here, those concepts came from elsewhere. It didn't come from that kind of tradition. Your part is your part. And in capoeira, for example, in Brazil, manifested very similarly. You could be playing the heku-heku, and all you're doing in the whole event is for an hour with the heku-heku. Another person's doing ishija on the drum, which is, and that's it for an hour. And how can you find peace and joy and connection in just that part? Because the temptation is, I need to stand out. Where did that idea come from? Of needing to be the one that stands out, the individual above everybody else. You're supposed to actually really synchronize with each other. Okay? That's sort of the idea. Okay? So I'm going to play a song, and then I'm going to invite you down here for the second song. And I have one of the better parts of myself here present that's going to come and actually get us moving and dancing together as a way of kind of bringing this to a close. Sounds good? Okay. And I'm going to ask our sound person, Spencer. Is that? Perfect. Vou pôr bem na tambora, como o gajo tinha que ver. Não começa tarde. Okay.
Guest starring Spencer. Woo!
And he's going to play the simple batuku, and you clap or tap on your lap along. Okay? So this song here is one that I wrote for my parents. I'm going to kind of focus more on my mom here. It just means obrigado, which means thank you. And it talks about my journey and the fact that really who I became was largely because of her. And she parented me from overseas. I came here when I was 12, and she's lived in Cape Verde since I've been here. And it was on the phone. It was the weekly calls, the conversations, the advice, to make sure that I didn't lose the essence of what it meant to be a Cape Verdean in a place where I wasn't allowed to like speak the language and things of that nature. So this one was to my mom. Her name is Belmira, by the way, which means good looking. And she is. All right. So, and when we get to the chorus, if you want to sing along, it's just obrigado. Those are the lyrics. Obrigado. 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 Simple enough? You got it. Okay, we go. Ami um homem melhor, não tenho mais de valor. Te agradece de fundo do coração. Quero fazer através dessa canção. As palavras que eu mereci mais, de todo o amor que eu ofereci. Obrigado, 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 obrigado e obrigado. Obrigado, mãe. Yeah. Oh. Cunhas guitarra arriba regal senta fica pena chão. Ta canta ser capaz, o es dom que lhe dão. Tem cheu de agradece, nem sabe se merece. Eu ainda de fazer nas canções é só para fazer. Obrigado, obrigado e obrigado, 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 mãe. Yeah. Oh. Na zeros e na sucessos, na tudo parte de minha vida. Anta xinti apoio de nha, anta xinti apoio de nha. Aquele amor incondicional, só tu palavra sabe mocata da mãe. É por isso que tá mostra com minha vida. Tenta comporta como filho, comporta como irmão de Jesus Cristo. Obrigado, obrigado e obrigado, 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 mãe. Yeah. Nanhazeros e meus sucessos, na tudo parte de minha vida. Da gente apoio de minha, da gente apoio de minha. Aquele amor incondicional, só com palavras sabemos cada dia. É por isso que te mostra com minha vida. Tenta comportar como filho. Porta como filho que tá amado. Obrigado, obrigado e obrigado, obrigado e obrigado, 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 mãe. Thank you. Was that horrible? Good. That was good. Okay. I don't need to go into the whole story behind that. I think it's pretty self-explanatory. Relationship to a child across the Atlantic. it's something that our Cape Verdean communities have to deal with very often. Like living away from loved ones, we have family literally all over the world. So it really is a song more about that connection than anything. Can I have y'all come down here to join us? Come on. It's just a request. Come on down. You can do batuco in almost any part of the body. One of my favorite actually is so when you see people dance batuco, you will see them, especially the women, playing up on their chest, opening up. We're not going to do it in a sort of more typical way. Usually you would wrap something around your bums as a way of accenting this area, right? But we're going to do a little bit of batuco and a little bit of cola sonjong. Okay, towards the end here, cola sonjong is basically this step. So you have, and you can clap along. I'm going to change up the pace a little bit for the feet. So now you're doing more of a hop. 1, 2, 3, 1. 1, 2, 3, 1. 1, 2, 3, 1. 1, 2, 3, 1. And whenever you feel like, this is your choice, you can go from the step to the basic one, which is the side to side. Stomp, 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 stomp. Over the hop. Now, if you're paying attention, you're feeling, I'm letting my hips just kind of go a little bit. And some of us are like, it's going to freeze it up. Right? Just sink into it. In terms of the actual cola sonjong, which means to glue, right? Cola means to glue. It comes from hundreds of years of dancing of a fertility dance from Africa. How many Cape Verdeans know that? That cola sonjong is from a fertility dance in Africa. Now, if you see, now, Cape Verdeans look at it and be like, wow, cola sonjong, that's pretty intense. I mean, you cola, you grab someone, you, oh, right? That's true. And we're like, wow, that's like only us that do that. And then you go over to Brazil, and there is this dance called Batuque de Umbigada. Anyone ever see it? Batuque de Umbigada? It is virtually identical. Virtually identical. The difference is they play the song to basically our Toque de Funana, but they do cola sonjong dance. Isn't that something? Didn't happen by accident, right? This is, again, all interconnected with some of its origins. Now, for today, I'm not going to have you guys do cola on each other and don't break it. But you're basically now taking the same step, now you're stepping to the side. So you're doing the same idea. Exactly. Now, see if you can pay attention to how your feet feel when it starts. And when you feel your feet stomping, can you feel other people? All of a sudden, y'all got really intentional with your stepping. Right? That's what I'm talking about. Hit. Hit. Oh. You guys gotta come to the middle. Come on. Lucy. Let's see if, I'm sure you're gonna feel the difference and you notice. Take about like 3 steps in. Come. Come. Yes. You see this? This thing we call proximity. Right? I remember when we first met, one of the most interesting dynamics between our cultures was proximity to other individuals, other people, right? Like we dance belly to belly, we dance glued, right? To feel your heartbeat when we are dancing. Sometimes we even put head to head so that the pulse, you can feel it. You can feel the pulse of each other's heart right here in your tummy. Head to toes. And now that was basic step. I didn't have to tell anyone in here to start like experimenting. It will just call for you. Yeah. So we're gonna give them some music, and if you feel like jumping in, jump in into the cola or contribute by clapping and by moving on the outside. But that stomping, when I called it out, all of a sudden we all were like trying to stomp and feel each other's vibration come into you. Okay? And for a little while, we just kind of like forget what's on the outside. The teheru is about the here and now. All the troubles that we have when we go back home will still be there. But for this one time, we are here. 100% be present in what you're doing. We brought it up today. What is it called now? Mindfulness or something like that? Yes. That's been around for long, to just be present. Okay? And be present with each other. So here's a simple song. I'll say, yeah, yeah, yeah. And you respond, ooh, yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, 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 yeah. Ooh, yeah, yeah, yeah. And I'm gonna say, le bandili. You respond, le bandili, your there's the bandili. Le bandili, le bandili. Le bandili, your there's the bandili. It's kind of a somber song, and that's very representative of a lot of the Tupa songs. Just so you know what you're saying. And this is now I took words from my grandmother and put it into the song. My grandmother used to say this every single morning. She would say, I'm ready, Lord, take me. That's kind of what she said. That's those are her words. Right? So, le bandili means take me from here. Le bandili. Le bandili, your there's le bandili. My grandmother raised 11 children. And was sort of like, she did her part. 92 years old when she passed. She did her part. Okay? All right, so here we go. Yeah, 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 yeah. Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, 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 yeah. Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah. Levandili, 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 levandili. Yeah. Hear you. That's allowed. Levandili, 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 your death, levandili, 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 your death, levandili. Trabalha para o dinheiro, puxada no morro. Jankova de chão, trabalha a vida inteira. reventado, minha alma cansado, nada de mostrar a ninguém. Ai, 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 ai. Ai, ai, ai. Ai, 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 ai. Levandili, 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 oh Deus, levandili. Levandili, 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 oh Deus, levandili. Levandili, 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 oh Deus, levandili. Já não tinha 10 filhos, por graça de Deus, uma voz de antiga e a tempo de vai. Para descansar, chamarem o Deus, já faziam parte essa esfera para ele. Ai, 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 ai. Ai, 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 ai. Ai, 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 ai. Let me hear you. Ai, 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 ai. Ai, 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 ai. Yo. Ai, 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 ai. Ai, 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 ai. Levandili, 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 oh Deus, levandili, 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 oh Deus, levandili. Now you ready to go faster? Leva, 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 leva. All right. Hey, I'm gonna tell you this. You know, you can feel the energy of the people who are trying to connect with you, and the energy of the people who are trying to connect to the music. And I can also feel the energy of the people who are like not letting go.
That one.
Huh?
That one.
Yeah. It's all part of this kind of experience. And the Teheru, I hope if you leave with anything from the stuff that we've talked about here, is that taking care of you is taking care of me. How many of you are familiar with Nakita Valerio, who said, shouting self-care at people who need community care is how you fail them. Shouting self-care at people who need community care is how you fail them. Very often, we have our group, and then we're like, okay, you individual, you seem stressed. You're ruining what we have here. I want you to go away, go take a bath, listen to music, do all of this self-care thing, and then come back when you're ready, so that our group stays pure and calm and together. What would happen if we actually took that to heart and said, okay, taking care of you is part of my responsibility. Investing in you is investing in me.
Amen.
What would happen if we do that? Then we might be one step closer to Ubuntu. If we're not ready to do that, then we're not practicing Ubuntu, we're saying Ubuntu, which is a beautiful idea, but if we don't put it into practice, then no one can benefit from it, right? Self-care is important. Take care of yourself. The music is our way of doing self-care. Martial arts is a way of us doing self-care, but there's a responsibility to it. And our institutions, when there was that question about Brown, what can he be doing? Brown needs to understand that it is part of the community, right? And taking care of its constituents, students, parents, and the place that houses them, which is Providence in this case, right, is part of their responsibility. And the more they invest, they will actually reap way more benefits. Benefits that they haven't even begun to imagine, because they've never really done that. Imagine where it's going to be if it does that. Okay? So I want to pause for a minute and see if there are any questions, comments, or vicious attacks before we start to close our afternoon. And thank you for jumping into the middle to demonstrate. Thank you to our guitarists for jumping in. All right, I feel like I've done way too much talking and gone for way too long without water. So I'm going to pause here and thank you for allowing me to share a little bit of my perspective. This is only one, of course, of many, but I hope that folks feel comfortable enough to reach out to our department if you want to reach me in the capacity as a director in the city, or reach out to our organization, which is in Warwick, trying to bring more cultural awareness and sensitivity to that region. Sunday, every month at the end of the month, we have what we call an open roda, which is a circle, and it will be in Providence. I can have folks send it out to participants today. If you want to come and see what terreiro really looks and feels like. It's a capoeira terreiro, so we will participate in music, you will see the movements. And again, when you're experiencing capoeira, you're not experiencing something significantly different than what happened in Trinidad or in Cape Verde. They're just manifestations of the very same roots, just different leaves of the tree. Okay, so you're invited to that. Happens every last Sunday of the month if you're interested in coming and experiencing one. 11:30. She'll send it out.
One more big round of applause for Silas.